Hello and welcome back to Anna Rose Reads the podcast. I am your host, Anna, and this week we are diving deep into grief and middle grade horror with Malinenko, the author of Broken Dolls. Now, Broken Dolls is already on shelves, and I highly recommend that you go pick up a copy if you're able to, regardless of your age, because Allie creates a language and imagery that makes talking about grief and understanding grief and the many ways that it affects a whole family unit in every shape and form so accessible and easy to understand and digest. Also through the lens of horror, because my God, are these dolls scary. I mean, truly, a few of these nighttime scenes that she has in this novel are truly frightening, no matter how you slice it. And I'm not even genuinely like afraid of dolls. This is just Allie's magic at work. So we talk about all these things, of course, the personal nature of this book, why, grief is kind of difficult to talk about, but making it accessible in a book like this and so much more. So I hope that you all enjoyed this conversation, and I'll talk to you guys after. Hello, Allie. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. I am thrilled because you are actually the first like official middle grade author that I have on my podcast. I talked to Paul Tremblay because he had a middle grade novel come out, but you were the very first like dedicated middle grade author, and I'm thrilled about it.
That is so cool. I'm thrilled too.
We are here today to obviously talk about your book, Broken Dolls, but in the event that people don't know who you are or not as familiar with your work as I am, if you want to just briefly introduce yourself, I would love to hear, all of what you're about and your other books.
Sure. So my name's Malinenko. I write middle grade horror. Middle grade is usually classified as the 8 to 12-year-old age range. My first book was Ghost Girl. My second was, which was a ghost story. My second was Disappearing House, which is a haunted house story. And now I have Broken Dolls, which is a creepy doll story.
It is very creepy indeed. And Allie, I've gotten to know you through Talking Scared, which is Neil McRoberts' podcast. You were
Mhm.
on there for an It deep dive episode. I've seen, we've kept up with each other on social media, and so I know how you feel about Stephen King and like all these things. So I feel like this is our first time like actually speaking, but I feel like we've
Yeah,
kept
yeah.
up for a while. So I'm thrilled to get into the book and, some of the other things that are horror adjacent in the world of horror fiction for you. If you want to go ahead also and just introduce the plot of Broken Dolls, I'll let you do it because I'm always terrified that I'm going to accidentally spoil something or say something that I shouldn't.
Sure. So Broken Dolls is the story of Kay. She is a 12-year-old girl whose grandfather, who she was very close with, recently passed away. So she's dealing with grief for the first time. And she has a little sister named Holly. And her mom and Holly go up to their Uncle Stan's house upstate New York. And they stay there while they're renovating their grandfather's old house. And while they're there, Holly starts finding all of these dolls like hidden in spaces. One is buried in the ground, one is hidden up in the wall, and the dolls come to life essentially. And they have some pretty nefarious plans for Holly, and it's up to Kay to come to terms with her grief and to save her little sister.
That is excellently put and not spoilery at all.
Yeah.
Um, so it's almost like you do this for, a living or something like
I
that.
mean, it's almost like I've talked about it before.
Yeah, almost. No, that's wonderful. So, the big thing that I always like to try and like kick off my interviews with is the point of inspiration for a book, because I just feel like that can open a lot of doors to, a lot of different talking points. But I want to preface that question with you with, I know that this is a personal story for you. Like I said, I've kept up with you on social media, so I want to talk about the inspiration, but I'm willing to dive however deep or not so deep you're willing to go with this in terms of where this all started for you and how Broken Dolls came to be.
Sure. No, I'm fine talking about it. So I knew I wanted to write a story about grief, and I started this about 3 years after my father had passed away, when I felt like I was ready to talk about what grief felt like and what the process of dealing with grief was. And during the course of writing this, my mother unexpectedly passed away. So that kind of just changed everything for me. I for the first time ever, I told my editor I was not going to make deadline, which I always turn my stuff in early. I'm crazy about it. But I knew I wasn't able to talk about this while I wasn't able to communicate like the feelings of grief while actively grieving. Um, and so, yeah, this story for me is a very personal story. And it's one that like I said, I was very much invested in discussing. And I think it's important to write for the age group that I'm writing and to talk about the things that I'm talking about, because I don't feel like we as a society are very good at talking about grief, and especially talking about grief with young children. And I wanted this book to be sort of a way for people to, because I feel like if you can talk about the story, you can talk about how you feel without actively talking about how you feel. So I kind of wanted this to be a mechanism that people have to use to talk about what it feels like to grieve someone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, like, I know when I was reading this, I was trying to like cast my mind back to a younger age to try and remember like what it was like to have conversations centered around death. Like, how did this enter my life? How did I, understand what grief was? And like, I really can't remember exactly how that all entered, my mind, but the one of my favorite things about Broken Dolls is you have this language and imagery that you kind of create with the book that is so accessible to readers of every age, every, like every stance, every position in their life, wherever they're at, to talk about this like incredibly hard thing. And like I even tried and like give shape or a definition of grief, and like where do you even begin? Like where do you
Mhm.
start? And so I wanted to hear from you, like obviously you mentioned it was personal, like you've been through, your fear, grief is something that you live with. So
Mhm.
I guess how did you approach this in a way that is so that it, ultimately ended up being so accessible and easy to understand, because that's such a feat, right? To be able to reach so many people about something that's so hard to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it was just a matter of being as honest as I could about the way I felt. And I think it's really, I'm very, very in touch with who 12-year-old Allie was. I still know that girl. And it was a matter of thinking what she needed to hear, which is really kind of how I approach all of the stories that I write. Like, what does what does 12-year-old Allie think? What is she feeling? What does she need to be told at the end of the day? And that is how, I came to this story in that sense. And I think that because I had of what my like time while I was writing was like, it was both hard and also very easy to just really connect to those feelings deeply. And it was a place to put them too, which I think I needed personally.
Yeah.
I could put all of my feelings about losing both my parents into this story and just kind of let it play out there. And I think that that was extremely helpful for me. And I hope that it's helpful for people who read it. That's all I can hope for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that was like another one of my questions too, is like what is your relationship with this book? Like, a lot of people talk about like the catharsis of being able to like put stuff on the page, but something like grief, like it's something that lingers. It's not
Yeah,
so easy like you can just dump it on the page and there it
yeah,
is,
yeah.
it's something that
Like,
you live with.
yeah, exactly. It becomes a facet of who you are, honestly. And like I wrote Disappearing House, and that was very much about my previous cancer diagnosis. And I felt like with that, I put it there and that's where it lives. And I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it anymore. But like grief becomes, a part of you. It's a book that will always be very important to me. But it's not a story I think I will ever be able to really go back to
Yeah.
because of how intricately tied it is to my emotional state at the time of writing it. Like I mean, also, when, a book comes out, by the time a book comes out, you've read it a bajillion
Right.
times. Like I don't ever want to look at any of them again. Like I'm so tired of my own stupid stories at this point. But I think with this one, it's just, it I'm just gonna let it be in the world and hopefully it will do for people what I felt like it did for me, which was to spend time with those feelings and really put down, you know, what going through that amount of grief was like.
Yeah. And, I think that Broken Dolls is entering a like huge catalog of grief horror. Like a lot of people have been saying like grief horror is having a moment and things like that. And, horror in general is having a moment. But,
Yes.
entering into the context of grief horror, I kind of wanted to know maybe before you entered Broken Dolls, writing the story, what grief horror was like to you and maybe if that relationship has changed on the other side of it.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely has changed. I think before I started this, I thought that I understood what grief was like in a contextual way.
Yeah.
And then actually experiencing it, I realized that it's a whole different show than what I had thought. And now, I read other grief related horror much deeper. Like I feel like, you know, this might sound terrible to put it this way, but I feel like you don't know until you know. And then
No,
when you
yeah.
know, you will always know. And it's just that. Like you're either on one side of the line or you're on the other. And when you're in the tent, you're unfortunately in the tent. But it's also I find reading other stories about grief to be helpful in the sense that like it makes you feel less alone because I think
Yeah.
grief it can be extremely isolating because it is because everyone thinks they know how they're going to feel and then it happens to you and you're like, oh, this was like I didn't expect anger, like I didn't expect to be angry about it before it happened and then it did and then I was like, oh, I'm mad. That's how I feel. So it's just kind of a bigger experience than I thought. And now when I read other grief story, like other grief horror, especially because
Hmm.
horror, I think is so good at communicating that emotion. I just feel like, I don't know, like I'm in a club and I feel like I can tell if someone writing it has been through it or not, like
Yeah.
there's certain very distinct markers that I think everyone experiences throughout the process. And it's like, you read a writer that hits them and you're like, oh, okay. Okay. You've been there. I've been there.
Yeah. I feel like it's like it's almost like a tap on the shoulder or a nod or like a secret handshake that like
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
there's just
yeah,
like an
exactly.
understanding in those
Yep, yep,
stories.
yeah.
And I think in particular, with Broken Dolls, I just want to say I love Kay dearly, so very
Oh,
much.
thank you.
Mostly because I really related to her in the midst of her grief and this like change, because they're moving, her mom and her sister are moving to this house for the summer with their Uncle Stan. So she's being uprooted from her life,
Mhm.
that she's used to and to go do something else that's, pretty grief focused. You're going to the
Yes.
epicenter of the loss, right? She has a hard time speaking. She has a hard time
Yeah.
finding her words. And I remember being younger and I was like, I was labeled like a relatively shy kid, but I remember just feeling like so overwhelmed, like you just don't know the words, right?
Yes.
And I
Yes.
feel like you really nailed that with Kay, this like overwhelming sense of not knowing or unsureness or just, not a lot of confidence. And what was that like to write, Like was that difficult for you to write? Because I don't know that I've resonated with a character in like that one specific way quite so well before?
I love that. I'm so glad that that was your experience. So it was not hard to write because it is me.
Yeah.
And it's something I still have. So like I find that when I am really upset about things, I can't talk about them. Like I literally cannot speak the words out loud. It's not even like I can't express myself. It's like I literally can't talk. Um and that has been a challenge, for me dealing with my grief because one of the things that is useful and helpful to do is to talk about how you're feeling and to like share like good memories, bad memories, just like to talk about these people. And it's like when you can't do that, they're all just kind of stuck in your head, and that's not always the best feeling. And so it was really important to me that Kay have this one specific thing that I had during, the height of my grief, was just an inability to talk about them at all. Like I couldn't talk about my mom or dad at all. Even though I wanted to. And it's just it's just the way my grief, I guess, manifested. And it was important to me to put that in the story because, well, I don't know if it's necessarily something that everyone experiences. It was one of the most profound parts of my experience.
Yeah.
So I wanted Kay to have that. I kind of felt like I would kind of exercise it a little bit if, I put it in the story. So
Yeah.
that was the reason for that.
Absolutely. And I know like for me that inability to like talk or speak or you just like bite your tongue. I think Kay a lot is because she seems like a very intuitive kid and a very empathetic kid. So she's reading the room, right? And
Yeah,
she can
yeah.
tell whenever like other family members are upset and she doesn't want to make it worse. But conversely,
Yes.
when they're experiencing joy, she doesn't want to disrupt their joy. And that's
Right.
such a hard thing for a kid to kind of sit with because I know for me, like I would go really quiet when there was conflict, right? It was like you
Hmm.
had to be really careful about your words whenever there's a sense of conflict. And so I think for Kay, she feels like she has to be really careful about her words all times because everybody's kind of out of sorts and not really
Yes.
regulating in their grief. So there's almost kind of like the social component to Broken Dolls I just found so fascinating that I think that it goes beyond Kay's own grief and like everybody else's, if that makes sense, you know?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, like I have two siblings. I have two sisters, and I know that our experiences with our grief were very, very different. And I had trouble talking about it. So, a lot of that is stuff that I wanted to talk about. And like, it was important to me to show Kay, as you said, as someone who doesn't want to like burst the bubble when people seem okay. Doesn't want to be the one to like be like, oh, but by the way, I'm sad, or really also you're still sad and we're all sad, and because that's very much how I felt when, dealing with the loss of my parents and spending time with my siblings. It was like, do we talk about it? Do we not talk about it? And I never wanted to be the one to bring it up because of that exact reason. So yeah, I mean, wow, the more we talk about this, the more I'm like, I really put a whole lot of me into this book, didn't I?
Hey, look, that's just how it happens sometimes.
It
But
really is. It is. It is. So,
yeah, and but there's another like really smart thing that you do with Kay and her character is, she also struggles to sleep, right? And so
mhm.
she's up at like kind of all hours of the night. She's just, and she kind of senses, again, she's a very intuitive character. So she senses that something's wrong whenever the dolls enter the picture, right? Like we've been talking pre-doll. We're talking, okay, dolls are in the picture now. Kay knows something's not right. She doesn't know exactly what it is, but she knows something's not right. And nobody's like really hearing her. And she doesn't know if it's maybe because she's not communicating it well or,
Mhm.
what's going on. But I think that the the ability to have her feelings about the dolls understood in her grief runs so similarly and it's such a good, I guess, like metaphor or imagery for what she's feeling on the inside because she's like I don't know that anybody else is grieving the way that I am because for instance
Right.
she sees like Holly is moving on and like still kind of
Right.
having fun and she's like man am I the only one who's like
Right.
kind of feeling this but then she's like also trying to say like something's up with these dolls and again nobody's hearing her so she's like very isolated in all of these feelings. I just felt like it was a really smart choice to kind of have her feelings about the dolls and everybody else's feelings about the dolls and her grief kind of mirror each other. Was that
Yeah. Yeah.
intentional?
Like that was very much on purpose.
Yeah.
Because it was important to me, like if she was going to feel isolated in her grief, I
Hmm.
needed that to like extend into the horror of the story.
Yeah.
So I needed her to feel like she wasn't being believed about everything.
Yeah.
So that was like actually on all of that was completely on purpose. And I think it serves the story well. Because I didn't want like the rest of her family to come off as like callous or uncaring, or it's like they're just like, oh, whatever, Kay. But it's more so that because she can't really talk about it, then she can't really explain how she's feeling. So they're less inclined to, believe her,
Yeah.
so yeah.
That's a big part of what she struggles with too, like with even putting words to what's going on with the dolls. Like I think it there, and this I don't think is a spoiler, but she finds an artifact in the house that kind of somewhat validates her, and it's a
Mhm.
written word that she's like, oh, these are the
Right,
words that like,
right, right,
and I just thought that that was like a really smart choice to have that be like her solidifying thing, it being words, written words,
right.
it feels like a little meta, in the context of this being a book and
Little
all.
meta.
And yeah, and we all really love books and what that does for us. So no, I just think it was a really interesting like social dynamic within the house and everybody else's feelings kind of ricocheting off of each other. And it's very involved and I don't mean this is like as a, but middle grade, you think it's going to be pretty straightforward, but there's so much going on. The longer
Yeah.
you peel back the layers of this family, I think it does incredible work to show kids like there's no one definition of family, and this is all of what can be going on,
Hmm.
in one place at a
Yeah,
time.
yeah. And I think that, that was also really important to me too, that like, you want, when you're writing for kids, you want them to see themselves in
Yeah.
the story that you're telling. And if the story doesn't relate to anything that they've personally experienced, you want it to be, it's the whole windows and mirrors thing. You want to be able to see yourself in the story, but also to be able to, a reflection of yourself, but then also like it's a way to see into other people's experiences. So that was important to me. And I think that the kids who have had experiences with grief will find a place there. And I think that the kids who haven't will see maybe what some of their friends have been through, or it will like be some kind of a primer for what it will be like, when it happens. And I was speaking to a couple teachers, and they teach 11-year-olds, and they were talking about how like that tends to be the age that at some
Hmm.
point during the school year their kids lose a grandparent,
Yeah.
around that age, and how it's always a concern as their teacher of like how to handle a kid that is grieving while they're in the classroom.
Yeah.
And I think, like I said, we're not great at talking about this stuff, and I think that's why books can be really super useful.
No, absolutely. And I mean, I think that it's like vital work to get to meet kids where they're at this age, because like if you don't
Yeah,
have the foundation to be able to talk about these things or even give words, to be able to point to this thing and be like, hey, I'm kind of feeling this.
yeah, exactly,
It's super
exactly.
important. And I've heard, in previous interviews you talk about how with middle grade books, a kid's attention span is much shorter than adults. So you got to be there, like right at the
Yep,
beginning to grab them and hold on to them for the
yep.
duration of the book. So I wanted to ask you, like from a craft perspective, what is your approach to grabbing kids' attention like that? Because you do it well. So I'm curious, like what the mindset is to get it to happen.
I mean, I think, I'm always rating for 12-year-old Allie. And I'm always bearing in mind that moment where she'd be like, this is boring me, and put it down. And I'm like, okay, veer away from that moment. But it's true. Like, I have had so many conversations with horror writers where it's like, well, it's middle grade. It's not really horror. And I was like, you try and keep a 11-year-old's attention for an entire book, because like, with an adult reading, they'll give you 50, 60 pages before they get bored. A kid will give you a sentence. They'll give
Hmm.
you a paragraph. That's it. Like if you don't keep them there, then you're going to lose readers. Like it's a given. And and I'm sure it still happens. But yeah, I do definitely, I think I keep that in the forefront of my mind while I'm writing. And if I ever get to like a section where I'm like, this is kind of boring me, then I know it's certainly going to bore a kid. Like, so if I'm not interested, like that's first and foremost, like it's got to go then. Like we got to change gears. Um, and I just try to keep it punchy. I always try to end my chapters where I'm like, what is the last line that's going to make the kid say, okay, one more chapter? Like I
Hmm.
got to turn the page. I got to figure out what happens next. And I think that's just something that you have to learn how to, like, from a craft perspective, it's just something you have to learn how to do. And like I said, it really comes down to your own reading of it. Like any moment I have where I'm like, "Ugh," like if I'm ever like meh about something, I'm like, nope, no good. Like that gets marked for revision
Yeah.
because I can't, if I'm meh, they're definitely going to be like, nope. And that book's going back on the shelf because they got lots to choose from.
Yeah, no, no kidding. Well, I mean, and I love the image of you keeping 12-year-old Allie by your side while you're writing
I
and
do.
consulting her. Like, hey,
Yeah,
what do you
yeah,
think
she's
about
very
this?
helpful.
Yeah. No, I love that immensely. And to kind of pivot a little bit, there's, we haven't gotten to the horror of Broken Dolls yet, but there's oddly a bit of coziness with this book in the sense of like, Kay really cares about her sister and they want to spend the night on the back patio one night, like in this, it's just something that they want to do because it's summer and that's what you do
Yeah,
when you're a kid, right? Like that
yeah.
takes you back to being a kid. And it reminded me so much of like Ray Bradbury's Dandelion Wine, like that coziness. And we all know, like the more that you're invested and the more, at home you feel within a horror story, the greater the stakes if whenever things go wrong. So I wanted to talk about like the role of like some of the comfort that's found in this book because there's a lot of scenes too between characters like with Uncle Stan and his interactions with Kay and his partner with Kay. Like there was a lot of wholesomeness and like kindness in those moments. Even though this is a horror book, I wanted to like shine a light on those really sweet and tender moments.
Yeah, I mean, I think and especially when you're writing for kids, you do have to pull back at times and have that. You have to pull away from the horror. It can't just be like horror all the time.
Right.
Um, and it was just also from a character point of view, like I just wanted, when she plays the Sudoku games
Yeah.
with Uncle Stan's boyfriend, I needed those moments of like levity. And I also it was a good opportunity for her to have good memories of her
Yeah.
grandfather. And I thought that you can't, because that's the thing about grief is it's not just, you're not just sad all the time.
Hmm.
It's not one note like that. Like a lot of the memories that you have are wonderful and you love spending time with them. And even if they hurt a little bit because they're just memories, it's still like those were good times. And I like that she gets that she, because she talks to him in her head and he talks back. And that is definitely something that I do with my parents in my head, like I can hear their responses to things that I would tell them. And, I wanted to give her like that little bit of comfort.
Yeah.
And I think, like I said, also with middle grade, I think it's important that you have that, that you pull back from the horror scenes to have those little moments so that you can rebuild the tension again, because that's how you make the horror work, is you build up the tension, you have the thing, you bring it back down, and then you build it back up again. And those were some of my favorite moments to write, honestly. I really liked, spending time with Kay in those moments where she could think about her grandfather and not be sad and just, have this little quiet time. And I like that, it was with David because he's outside the family, so it's like she doesn't feel as if, he has like he wouldn't have the same experience. He wouldn't have those memories. Like it doesn't, it's not like her uncle or her mom because that was their father. With Uncle Stan's boyfriend, it's removed, and that is a place where, I think Kay can just kind of be herself and not feel the grief as overwhelming.
Yeah. And the thing that I've kind of thought about a lot when it comes to grief or like missing somebody in general, right? Like that person is multitudes to different people. And like much like you
Mhm.
said to Kay's mom and her uncle, that is their father, not the grandfather. And in
Right.
the flashbacks that or the conversations that Kay has with her grandfather when she's doing the Sudoku and stuff like that, um, the impression that I got is that Kay felt so understood and seen by her grandfather
Mhm.
and that she didn't have to explain or use words for him to kind of like meet
Mhm.
her where she was at. And that's like what she
Right.
misses most in this moment. And it's
Right.
just like extra poignant because, you know, like she wants everybody to get her like her grandfather does, and he's like the one person who did. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
that was like the real blow to my heart in those
Yeah.
moments that it felt so real and palpable. But, you know, like you mentioned, like missing somebody, everybody's missing somebody, and that person is
Right.
a different person to everybody. So
Right.
grief is just such this like
Right.
all-encompassing thing that I think that you do a great job of showing like multiple variations of how it is within the same household, you know?
Yeah. And that was like, important to me is because no no person nobody grieves the person the same way.
Yeah.
Like everybody had a different relationship, therefore their grief is going to be a different kind of feeling. Which is what makes grief, while one of the most universal things in the world, because we're all going to lose people we love, so isolating, because the way I'm going to feel about it is not necessarily the way you're going to feel about it or the way my sisters are going to feel about it. So it was important to me to show that, like, even though, Kay shares these feelings with other people, it's not always the same experience. Um, yeah, yeah.
I think too one of the aspects that I really enjoyed, and I'm about to get to the horror part of this, I promise. But the last like little lighthearted nugget that I want to mention about Kay's story is like the kind of friends that she makes. You know, this group of girls, like they go and play baseball, and one in particular, you know, she grows really close with. But they work together towards the end of the book. You know, like they kind of band together. They're like, we're gonna, you know, make sure that the parents hear us on this. We're gonna stop this. And I thought that the aspect of believability with the adults and their own thing versus Kay's accessibility to somebody her own age and somebody that she like really likes and you know kind of cares for, and them accepting her and her stance and her beliefs of what's going on back at the house was really really important. So I
Yeah.
kind of want to talk about the role of like that acceptance and believability and all of these things for Kay among her peers, you know?
Yeah, well, I mean, so one of the things with writing middle grade horror is that you kind of have to get rid of the adults,
Yeah.
because if the adults are available, they can solve the problem. So like it's kind of like one of those rules. So often the adults are usually killed off. And in this scenario, I was like, well, I can't get rid of the adults. Like they have to be a part of the story. I can't, like, Kay can't be on her own, because of what I'm writing about. So it came down to like making sure that, I talked about how the other people in the scenario were feeling about what they were going through. Joey, who is the main girl that she becomes friends with, um, and they attempt to tell the adults what's going on. And they don't, they're not listening. And I think when you're asking about believability, like what specifically do you mean?
Like, for instance, Joey, you know, she shows some trepidation at first with like
Right.
whether what's going on, whatever Kay is saying about these dolls going on at the house is like really happening, right?
Right.
But she's much quicker to get there than the
Right.
adults are in this situation. And I think, you know, for me, as a kid who kind of like struggled with friends whenever I was younger, I feel like it goes a long way to see like, hey, maybe you can rely on friends and open up to them and be honest with them and they will
Yeah,
believe and
I
help
mean,
you, you
I
know?
needed I needed somebody to be on Kay's side,
Yeah.
and when she was already dismissed by her family, like I didn't want her to have to do this by herself. Um, and that's why, I think the thing I really like about Joey's character is that she initially is like, okay, well, I saw what I saw in the video,
Hmm.
and I saw what was in the journal, but like I didn't see anything. And then when she does see something, she's like, okay, I'm not dealing with this. And her first instinct is to just get out of there.
Yeah.
And it's like her, her friendship with Kay is the thing that keeps her there, because she knows that Kay doesn't have anyone else. And I think that, like, the thing, they truly believe that, Holly is in a lot of danger. Um, and so what I mean, I guess, what other choice do they have
Yeah.
but to stick with each other and try and fix this, because the parents are doing nothing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think that I like the way that you portrayed it though, that it wasn't just like, oh yeah, you know, like it wasn't I'm gonna jump in and we're gonna solve it. Like, like
Right.
there was that natural trepidation.
Right.
And then like, Kay kind of got to experience what it was like, well, maybe she doesn't fully believe me, but then they overcame it. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like that journey
Yeah.
of like overcoming that I don't even know if difference is the right word, but
Right. I think it was just, well, I mean, it's a pretty unbelievable thing that's
yeah.
happening. So, I mean, if someone came to me and was like, "Hey, so these dolls are alive and they're trying to destroy my little sister," I'd be like, "Oh, okay. Sure they are." So yeah. I think that, I tried to make Joey's response to that as realistic as possible, within the framework of the story, that her gut instinct is to not believe her,
Yeah.
until she comes around,
Yeah.
which is exactly how I would respond.
Yeah, well, I've just imagined, like there was nothing that drove, I do remember this about being a kid. There was nothing that drove me more nuts than like being treated like a kid. And there's a
Yes.
certain level of realness that is in this book that you're not treating the kids like kids, you're treating them like adults.
Right.
Like this is what the world is kind of like, and this is what it's gonna, you're gonna be up against that I
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
appreciated. Because like
Yeah.
again, there's nothing more annoying to a kid than being like me.
No, no, because it's the act of being dismissed,
Yep.
as if your thoughts and feelings don't matter, and my thoughts and feelings when I was 11 years old are just as valid as my adult thoughts and feelings are, and kids get dismissed all the time. And, I remember how frustrating that was. And it's one of those things that just, I don't think will ever change. It's
Yeah.
something that they're always going to go through, unfortunately.
Yeah, very true. But I am glad that there are books like yours where there is that outlet that, hey, we're gonna be real for a sec about this.
Awesome. I'm glad to.
Yeah. So I'm gonna move on to the horror portion of
Okay.
this horror podcast. The dolls are very freaky, Allie. They're so very freaky. I'm gonna I'm gonna let you talk about them and where the inspiration for them came from because you've shared pictures of some of the dolls that you've come across and
Yep, they're right on my bookshelf over here. I'm
yeah,
staring right at them.
yeah,
The other one's over here.
I'm gonna let you talk about them because man, they got to me. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, so I've never had a fear of dolls. So like when I decided to write this book, I was like, I really did spend some time like trying to figure out why dolls scare people. I still don't think I fully understand because it's just not something that I experience. But I definitely, I did some research. And I based all of the dolls in the book on dolls that I found at this like thrift store, when I went to go visit my in-laws. And like Tamsin in the story is just ahead, and she's quite literally just ahead. She's on my shelf right there. She's looking right at me. And the Raggedy Ann doll is a Raggedy Ann doll. And I just, once I bought these things, I was like, okay, well, I have to write something for them. Like there has to be something. And I had already been considering writing, a grief book. And it just, I don't know, it seemed to fit well for me. I don't know. There was something about them that I was like, if the idea behind a doll is, the whole notion behind the dolls is that they won't ever die,
Mhm.
and so like that's why it's better to be a doll than not to be a doll. And Kay's whole experience has to be learning that death is going to happen and it's okay. Um, and that it's more meaningful to live your life, and experience everything you want to experience. Um, but yeah, I mean, like I said, it's not something that I was ever frightened of. So, like whereas I have like a deep, I wrote this appearing house and I have like a deep haunted house like fear. Like haunted houses
Yeah.
freak me out. But dolls just never did. So it was a lot of fun to like, read people's like stories about them and why they're so bothered by them. But yeah, yeah, and then again, once I found them at the thrift store, I was like, well, they need a story. I can't have just this head sitting on my shelf and not have any meaning for me. That doesn't make any sense.
No, absolutely. And I'm curious, what do you think it is about dolls that freak? Because again, it's not something that like much like you like they didn't. I'll give it like a sideways glance. Yes. Does it keep me
Yeah,
up at night?
sure.
No.
Yeah, I honestly don't know. And I think it might stem from the fact that like I wasn't when I was a kid, like I didn't have a lot of dolls. I was a stuffed animal kind of
Oh,
kid.
me
Like I
too.
had a
Same.
ton of stuffed animals, but I didn't really have any dolls. So like I never had any interest in them. Um, so I don't know. Like I still don't fully understand why people are so, I think it's the idea of like a human form in miniature that bothers people. But like honestly, I don't know, man. People who are bothered by dolls, email me. Let me know. What
Yeah.
what what is the deal?
No, I'm very curious too. There's like certain things though, like I kind of get like I don't this is so specific and niche and a little off topic, but like anytime in a book or in a movie, whenever you're like watching the thing, whatever it is, and it's like kind of hiding and it does the thing where it peeks slowly around the corner.
Yeah.
That always like weirds me out to
Yeah,
hell.
100%.
Like, and I don't know if it's because it's like that human like instinct of like, oh, let me get a look. That's something that we all relate to. And so like I
Right.
get like the dolls like kind of look like us. They're kind of freaky, but like again, it's not something that's kept me up at night. But I can relate to like that human motion, the human visual
Sure.
similarity being freaky, but I don't know. Like you got me
Yeah,
on that
I mean,
one.
also they're tiny. Like,
Yeah.
what are you afraid of? Just punt them. Just give a good hard kick. They're gonna be out the window. Like, I don't know. It's just it's
Well,
fascinating.
well, your dolls, you can't just punt them.
This is true.
Unfortunately,
This is true.
your
They will come
your
back for
doll,
you.
yeah, your dolls and broken dolls tend to have some grit and some tenacity.
They sure do.
Um, how did you approach writing some of the more frightening scenes in this book that they happen at night? The one that I'm thinking of like really happens at night, and like the doll being in one place and the doll being in another and the quick accumulation of dolls also was like,
Yeah.
wow, there were so
Yeah.
many
They
things
all
to
just start
that.
showing up.
Yeah, yeah, they just kind of happen to be
Well,
there.
because that, and I did that because I was like, okay, how do I make them scary? I'm like, well, if there's a lot of them, that's scary. Like
Yeah,
it's unnerving to like open a door and see that many dolls in one space. Um, and then like, I just I don't know. I wanted them to do things that I found unnerving, like when the head rolls. I was like, oh, well, that would
Yeah,
upset me. Like that would, I just tried to think of all the ways in which this thing that doesn't scare me could actually scare me. And I
yeah,
was like, those are all the things that I will write. And my editor also was like, who's wonderful. Sarah was extremely supportive. And she was great because in her notes, she'd be like, more of this, do this, but bigger. And I'm like, okay, this is how I know I'm hitting the creepy parts.
yeah.
Um,
No,
yeah. And it was just like, well, if they're everywhere and there are many of them, like that is genuinely scary. Like, why are there so many?
yeah, and the we're not talking about like months here. We're talking about like in the course of
Yes, because
days.
it's only
Like,
over the course of the summer.
yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
days and weeks we're talking about that this
Mhm.
happens. So,
Yeah.
no, I was genuinely frightened quite a few times in the night scenes. It just makes you, whenever you like sleep in a really dark room and you like notice an off shadow, it like gives you pause. Like after
Yeah.
reading Broken Dolls, I was like, that's a really small shadow. But also, and I want to talk about this as well without hopefully not spoiling it. But there is a backstory to these dolls and why they do what they do. And I was a
Mhm.
little curious if you could elaborate on how you landed on their backstory and like I know obviously you've already said the idea that dolls live forever and isn't that better
Right.
than dying, but
Right.
but beyond that, there's kind of like an extensive history, backstory to them. And I thought that was really interesting that you included it in the book. So I'm curious about those inspiration points.
Yeah, well, I mean, I wanted because if you're going to bring a doll to life, I feel like the big answer is like, well, how?
Yeah.
How does that work? Because like we all kind of know, like we all kind of a general communal understanding of ghosts, and like where ghosts come from and why ghosts exist, and but like if you're going to bring an inanimate object to life, you kind of have to talk about like, oh, how did that happen? So I didn't want to just breeze on past it. I actually kind of struggled with coming up with a reason. um That was probably the hardest part of the book to write because I was like, I've got nothing. I have no good reason. So going back into the past and having the, I don't want to spoil it, but having that, chapter that goes back into the past to talk about where the dolls came from, really stemmed from, honestly, it was because I was writing this shortly after COVID,
Yeah.
And it made me spend a lot of time thinking about, past pandemics. And I spent some time researching the influenza, and I was like, this could work. I think this could work.
Yeah.
So yeah, but it was not, it was definitely not it was probably the hardest part to write because I really was like, I got nothing.
No, I
So
get
I'm
it.
glad it worked for you because that gives me hope that it did pull it off.
No, for sure. And not again, not a spoiler, but there you leave us on a note that lingers. Whether things are really at rest or maybe they may or may not
Yeah.
be, you have to read to
Yeah.
find out.
Yeah.
But no, that makes a lot of sense. And I really love the book and all of that it accomplishes in talking about grief. It genuinely like terrifying. And I think that one of the ways that you grab people's attention is to get to the heart of the matter in this way by
Right.
being frightening or being earnest and all of these things. And the book accomplishes that in spades. I'm going to ask you a little bit
Yeah.
of a cheeky question now because I
Okay.
mean, we both are fans of Stephen King, and he read Broken Dolls and he enjoyed it. And I just want to let you talk about what that experience has been like for you because I think it's just
Um,
cool as hell.
it's one of the craziest things that has ever happened to me in my entire life. I don't think
Yeah.
it'll ever get beat. Growing up as, a King fan. So the way King came into all this and the way it got blurbed is that I was on Talking Scared on Neil's podcast. And we were discussing the book It. And he listened to the podcast and he liked some of the things that I said and then wound up following me on social media. And I quite literally, like, the day I got that notification, dropped my phone on the floor because I was like, what is happening? What is happening? Um, and then I shared the title of the book, Broken Dolls, and he was like, oh, this sounds so good. And I was like, oh my God, you're talking to me. What is happening? And then he asked for a copy. And so they printed out because I wasn't going to have any ARPs, which are advanced reader copies, because HarperCollins doesn't really do that anymore. So I was like, listen, you got to get Stephen King a copy of this book. Like, this is incredible. So they printed up a copy specifically for him, and he blurbed it. And it's funny, I'm sitting while I'm talking to you at my laptop on my writer's desk, and on the wall across from me is a cutout of the email that he sent me, and it's just 3 words that he wrote, "This is good."
Yeah.
And I keep it on the wall there for whenever I have a bad writing morning. And I look at it and I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
if if you pulled it off for Stephen King, you can pull it off again. Um, but yeah, it was crazy, And then they asked if they could put what his response to it was on the book, and he was like, yeah, of course. And that's how that wild and insane thing happened in my life, that Stephen King knows that I exist,
Yeah.
which is just bonkers.
Well, the reason that I bring up the question or I ask it is, I think I know what it's like to get recognition from somebody that you like really admire and respect and like it particularly with art, right? Like it is
Yeah.
such a big fucking deal. Like it is
Yeah.
such a big deal.
Yes.
And
It's
so
huge.
yeah, and so I think, just knowing what like it means to you, having listened to Neil's podcast and like you've
Mhm.
talked about it on social media, it just goes a long way to like see that happen. And like as somebody on the outside, I just, you get thrilled. You get absolutely
Yeah.
thrilled that it
Yeah.
happened.
I mean, the fact he like, it's like, not only does he know that I exist, he cared enough to ask to read. Like, how many books
Yeah.
he must get sent? Like, I can't even fathom it. Like, to blurb and to read and to like comment on. Like, he asked to read it and he liked it enough to send me that email
Hmm.
that says, this is good. And it's just like I said, every time I look at that, I'm like, okay, like, you can do this.
Yeah.
Like, you can write this book. So yeah, it was one of the most surreal and incredible things that has ever happened. And I say that as someone who's gotten the wonderful opportunity to meet so many horror writers that I care about. But, Stephen King is Stephen King.
Yeah. No, I get it. And
Yeah,
but I
he's
mean,
been
he's
there
right.
from day one.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I mean, no,
Yeah.
he's right. It's a wonderful book. And, I kind of want to open up the space in general. I feel like the middle, and even, me, I'm a late bloomer to middle grade horror. Like, I
Hmm.
didn't, it wasn't until I think it was like Trevor Williamson from Slay House did his,
Yes.
stuff with middle grade horror and, trying to spotlight you guys who are doing the hard work because I think, what I do remember of being a kid at that time was I probably would have picked up your books and been very appreciative to have had them in my catalog, like in my vernacular to understand what's going on around me. Maybe I wouldn't have
Yeah.
related, like 100%, but it would have been a touchstone for
Yeah.
me. And I think it's just such important work right now whenever we're living in a time where communication is so freaking difficult.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the way that that gets better is with our youth and like who else is communicating with our youth more than like you guys? Like y'all are doing the work to like give them these things to not only enjoy on an entertainment basis, but like hopefully help them, right? Like
Yeah.
that's so
I mean,
crucial.
yeah, because that's the thing about horror. Like horror is a wonderful vehicle to talk about stuff that's hard to talk about.
Yeah.
Stuff like death. It's a good vehicle for that. And those conversations need to happen. And, you know, I had a kid come up to me at the launch and his mom was like, he's so happy that there's someone writing horror stories for him. And I literally almost started crying.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's all I want to do, buddy. All I want to do is write horror stories for you. Like,
Yeah.
because they were the things that mattered to me when I was a kid. Like, and there wasn't as many of them like there are now. Like there's a lot more like middle grade, what it used to be when I was growing up, because I'm elderly, is like it was very few. It was a much smaller selection than what it is now, which is huge. And middle grade horror, especially, I think some of the best storytelling is going on in middle grade horror right now. And it's like that's where that's where your horror fans come from. Like
Yeah.
like we're writing the stories that hook them when they're young so that they will become lifelong horror fans. And I think that's really important. I think it's very cool.
It is very important. And I've had this very specific conversation with Tanya Pell about it because we had like bonded over Mary Downinghan. Like that was like the books
Yeah.
that I was
Yeah,
reading when I
yeah,
was
yeah.
younger and like kept me up at night.
Yep.
And
Yeah,
then
she's amazing.
here I am now, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Like it becomes, like when you have those touchstone experiences with art and especially with stories when you're a kid like that, you get moved in the right direction and that's going to be part of your life forever. And I think it's just really incredible to have the honor of working in a space that gives people that very thing. I think it's really incredible.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, and I want to support you guys however I can to make sure that
Well,
it
you're
keeps
doing a
happening.
wonderful job.
So, no, but thank you so much, Allie, for answering all of my questions about Broken Dolls. I really love the book, and I think it's doing boatloads of work with so much ease. Like it's just manhandling this like grief is such a hard topic to cover, and you are
Yeah.
just like handling it's just getting handled in the book in such a way that's accessible and there's language to it and there's visibility and I could not be more thrilled that this book is in the world because I think that we need it. Is there
Well,
anything
thank you
that
so
we
much.
oh of course, and is there anything that we did not touch upon about the book or anything else that you wanted to talk about before we sign off?
No, no, I'm just, I'm excited that it's in the world, because publishing is so slow. And it's
Yeah.
like I feel like I've been waiting forever for this book to come out. I'm thrilled with the reaction people are having towards it. Like, I had an amazing, amazing launch. And I'm just really glad that, people are connecting with Kay and her story. This was a very important book to me. It will always be a very important book to me. So I'm glad that people are digging it.
Yeah. And I do want to ask one more important question is, are you working on anything now and like what's on the horizon for you,
I
if you're
am.
allowed to talk
So
about it and all that good stuff?
sure. Yeah, I can talk about it. I am on submission right now. So that means it's with editors. Is a book that I wrote about a family of witches that I'm also very excited about. It's very much my sister's book. And I am currently writing a book about monsters in the woods, which are all metaphors for anxiety, because it's time to talk about anxiety.
I will, oh, I'm gonna need that one. I literally had a mug this morning
We
with like a
all need to talk
with a
about our anxiety.
oh my God,
So
no
yeah, so that's
kidding.
what I'm working on now. And then I have a couple of different ideas for what comes after that, but that's still a long ways down the road. So, but yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I'm really ready for the anxiety monster book because whew, in this day and age, we could all use it, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, seriously.
No kidding. Well, thank you so much, Allie. Broken Dolls is already on shelves. And just thank you so much for having the deep conversation about the things that are not so easy to talk about.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I love your podcast. This is such an honor.
Thank you. Another huge, huge thank you to Allie for her time and just being so open and honest in this interview about the grief that she's experienced, how it all played out in the novel, her, characterizations of Kay, the horror of these dolls in this novel and everything else. It was truly a lovely conversation, and I cannot wait to see what else Allie puts out into the world of middle grade horror because I think her voice is so, so important. Now to pull away from the book side of things and entering the podcasting time veil where everything is so, so loopy. Assuming that all goes well, you all will be hearing this while I am hopefully out of the country and hopefully sitting next to a pool or a beach with a book in my hand as I am on my honeymoon. Again, fingers crossed all goes according to plan. All flights are not delayed or canceled and all goes according to plan. So, assuming this gets out on time, I hope that you all are having a lovely week. I will be back with my regularly scheduled episodes next week. And in the meantime, I hope that you all have a lovely, lovely week. I will say that my next guest, once I pull up my handy dandy schedule, is Mr. Sam Rebelon. We will be talking about Galloway's Gospel in depth. That was a really cool conversation. I recorded that one the same day that I recorded this conversation with Allie, so it was a full day of exquisite horror conversations. So stay tuned for that. I hope that you're all well. Thank you all for tuning in, for supporting the show.